Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. It has been a wet week across the UK. In fact, Storm Babette led to severe flooding in places. Now, will the unsettled theme continue as we head towards the end of October and into November? As usual, I'm going to start by taking a look at the view across Europe and the North Atlantic. The animation runs from 18 GMT, Tuesday the 24th. And at the outset, it's quite a mixed picture. There's an area of low pressure pulling away eastwards and one to our southwest. Those are bringing showers or longer spells of rain to parts of the UK. There are some dry periods too. And that continues to be the case as I run the sequence. Disturbances move in from the west and showers or long spells of rain at times, but it's as we go into and through the weekend that I think the details need watching, because they are uncertain at this stage, but indications from the computer models that a deeper area of low pressure could develop and then push eastwards across the UK. It brings a potential for longer and heavier outbreaks of rain as well as strong winds. But into the early part of next week, the general picture remains the same. Areas of low pressure, never far away. It's staying unsettled. That's the theme for week one, I'm afraid. More showers or long spells of rain. The distribution of the rainfall, quite uncertain. It will be varying, and I'll take a look at that in a moment. The jet stream and air temperature sequence. The greens over the UK here to begin with indicate temperatures at about 1,500 metres above our heads, being close to the average. The mottled shading is the jet stream track, and it's basically to the south of the UK through the first week. But the cold air on its northern side is really staying to the north of the UK, and we are left under fairly average conditions with areas of low pressure there staying very close by, as I've already indicated. So taking a look at the temperatures down at ground level, not a great deal of change, I think, through the first week. These are forecast maximums on Wednesday, maybe 12 or 13 in southern and central regions, single figures as you go into the northern half of the UK. Moving forwards to Friday, at this point temperatures are just edging up a little bit, something milder into the south, 13s, 14s, maybe 15s, still single figures in the north. Then into the weekend and more of the same, perhaps turning colder in Scotland and Northern Ireland, but still rather mild, I think, for the time of year, maybe a degree or two above the average in the south. At this time of year, 13 Celsius is close to the norm in the London area, and I think these do have a tendency maybe just to be undershooting a little bit at the moment. Into the early part of next week, more of the same, 13s, 14s, 15s in the southeast, East Anglia and much of southern England, single figures as you head north and west. So not a great deal of change there. I don't think temperatures are going to be a big factor through the first week. But I've already mentioned that we could see a deeper area of low pressure pushing in from the Atlantic during the first weekend. These charts are generated using data from the UK Met Global model, and they are quite similar to the GFS. There are some differences in the details. The GFS is a model which the initial animations were based on, but these are for 00 GMT on Monday the 30th of October, and you can see the area of low pressure, quite a deep one, sitting over the UK, pretty much tracking eastwards, northeastwards across central areas. The strongest winds on its northern and southern flanks, and on the right, forecast wind gusts at the same time from the same model run. You can see 60-mile-an-hour gusts around the Scottish coast. Also, possibly quite windy there in the far southeastern corner, but it is very much a case of keeping an eye on the short-range forecasts, because the exact track and intensity of this low pressure is still uncertain, but it is one to watch, I think. Rainfall. The aggregate charts here are for days 0 to 5, generated from the ECM and GFS models. The key takeaway, I think, is probably that the driest conditions are actually in the northwest on both of these. That is unusual. Often the northwest of the UK, Western Scotland in particular, collects the most rain, but the pattern at the moment for jet stream tracking further south is taking those areas of low pressure further south, and that's where the wettest conditions may well be. You can see the yellow and orange shading on the On both of them, really around Wales, the southwest and the south coast. Moving forwards to the 0 to 10 day aggregates, the pattern I've just been discussing shows up very clearly here. The light shading in western Scotland showing around 20 to 25 millimetres of rain. The reds and oranges in the south showing potentially over 100 millimetres in places. In fact, the ECM there on the left is showing some very high totals down to the southwest and along the south coast. So I think the takeaway here is that, as ever with these deterministic snapshots, the values they show may be quite a long way off the mark when we're looking this far ahead, but it's the broad patterns which need paying attention to, and they are reasonably consistent here, showing the wettest conditions mostly in Wales, the southwest and southern parts of England, with the driest ones in the northwest. So quite an unusual pattern. I think it suggests that there could be a risk of more flooding at times, but as ever, keep up to date with the details as we progress through the period. How do the deterministic models compare with each other in more general terms as we head towards the end of the first week? Here is the GFS on Tuesday, the 31st of October. It's Halloween. Is it going to be a spooky one? Well, I don't know about that, but not a particularly pleasant looking one, I think, would sum it up. We've got the low pressure areas staying close to the UK, as I've discussed already. No real signal for high pressure to be dominant at this stage. The Canadian model has low pressure pulling away eastwards, and there is some colder air beginning to move southwards. But all in all, it's a changeable picture. The German icon, interesting here because we've got a stronger signal there for high pressure to the north, and there's some cold air moving down from the northeast, just starting to flirt with Scotland. Areas of low pressure further south, keeping things quite mixed. The ECM also has low pressure pulling away eastwards and colder air starting to approach from the north. Areas of low pressure also close to southern and central regions, so changeable or quite unsettled, maybe colder in the north. Finally, the UK Met global model. It also has a signal for high pressure there close to Iceland. Areas of low pressure moving across the UK, and that cold air maybe just starting to encroach into Scotland as well on this particular global model run. So taking them all together, unsettled towards the end of the first week, temperatures close to the average, maybe a little bit above it in the south. That could well be because of lots of cloud at night, keeping the overnight lows above that norm. The daytime temperatures may well be not too far away from it, as I've already suggested, 12s, 13s, 14s, maybe 15s in southern Britain. But a chance of some colder air beginning to push down into Scotland at this point. It's quite uncertain. So does that trend for colder conditions in the north, or that possible one at least, continue as we go through the second week? A good deal of uncertainty, of course, at this range, particularly so today, and I'll explain why a little bit later. But I'm going to start off with the 16-day GEFS ensemble data, which I usually use, and then I'll come on to the European ensemble data, which I don't always show unless there's something different, which it's highlighting, and that is the case today. Here's the London GEFS plot. The signal here in terms of air temperatures is for them to be dipping a little bit below the average later on. The thick purple line, the ensemble mean, stays close to a 30-year norm, the thick black line through the first few days, but then it's sliding below it. The rain spikes there along the bottom continue to appear through the second week, but the number of them reduces perhaps, so maybe turning a little bit drier if this is correct as we go through the second week. The snow row along the very bottom isn't troubling the scorers there, at least on the London chart. The 2-meter temperature trend, using the data tables, is perhaps edging downwards. It's not a strong trend. So on the last chart, those air temperatures were at about 1,500 meters above our head. These are the values down at the ground level, the ones we actually experience. I think through the second week, there is a signal for the amount of green in these columns to be increasing. The light green shows forecast maximums between 6 and 10, so a greater chance of cooler days later on. Up to Manchester, and the signal here is for air temperatures to be dipping below the average. It's a stronger signal than on the London plot. The rain risk is ongoing. Later on, maybe the number of spikes there starts to reduce a little bit, but it's staying quite wet. The data table for Manchester, temperatures edging downwards here. The signal's more well defined, I think, than it was on the London one. And as usual, because we're a bit further north, it's a slightly cooler picture anyway. That's generally the case, of course, not always. Up to Glasgow, and the signal is more marked here because the air temperatures are mostly below the 30-year average through the second week. The thick purple line there staying below the thick black line, and a lot of support from the individual runs. I don't think that mean is being skewed by a few very cold ones. There's quite a big cluster there where air temperatures are a little bit below the average, and those are what is causing the thick purple line to be down there rather than just one or two very cold outliers. Rainfall across the bottom, lots of spikes. It's a wet picture through the second week, and this time the snow row is troubling the scorers at least a little bit. It's reaching 2 or 3 on some days as we go through the second week, and the maximum value it can take is 33, so 3 suggests just about a 10% chance, or just slightly less, isn't it, of snow falling, not accumulating. The 2-metre temperature data table for Glasgow, temperatures edging downwards here as well, and this time there's quite a reasonable amount of the darker green there. Those are forecast maximums of between 1 and 5 Celsius. They are in a minority, but 20%, pushing up towards 29 or 30% later on. So colder in the north. The frost risk, here's the overnight lows, which have been forecast for Nottingham through the second week. Basically, it's a dark green shading which can lead to ground frost because those minimums are between 1 and 5 Celsius. Remember that to get a ground frost, temperatures don't need to be dipping below freezing at this level. But with that said, the values there, I'd say low to moderate chance of ground frost developing on 1 or 2 nights. It doesn't look particularly cold, maybe lots of cloud, stronger winds at times, and rain as well. So those factors all conspiring to hold up temperatures on most nights. I was asked if I could show one of these things for a location further south, so I've picked Berkhamsted, which is where I happen to live. I didn't want to use London because the frost risk in London tends to be quite a lot lower because it's an urban heat island. So I'm using Berkhamsted, and it's consistent with the Nottingham data table. There's less dark green shading in these columns than on the Nottingham one, but not hugely less. So the chance of ground frost in the home counties probably been a little bit lower than in central parts of England, but not hugely so. But as I say, taking those together, I don't think frost is going to be a big factor through week 2 of the forecast period. Now, at the start of the week 2 part of this, I mentioned that I would be showing the ECM data as well this week because it is a little bit different to what GEFS is showing. Here's the London air temperature plot. The mean, also shown by the thick purple line, is staying mostly above the 30-year average, unlike on the GEFS London chart where it was dipping below it. So that highlights uncertainty. And the other point worth noting here is that the ECM data I'm using is actually 12 hours older than the GEFS because it's what is available to me at the time of recording. But despite it being older, it's generally considered a little bit more accurate. So those 2 factors tending to cancel each other out. The comparable chart for Glasgow, I'm not going to show the Manchester one because it's just important to highlight the differences between GEFS and ECM, I think, has air temperatures close to the average, maybe the mean dipping a little below it at times, just climbing back towards it there later on. But the key takeaway here is that ECM ensemble is not really supporting that idea of it turning colder, not even in the northern half of the UK as we go through the second week. So it casts a good deal of uncertainty on developments, and I'll incorporate that when I do the summary a little bit later on. But just looking at the rainfall through the second week based on the ECM ensemble data, these are showing the chance of 5 or more millimeters rain falling on days 8, 9 and 10, so the first 3 days of the second week. Wettest really at this point in the west, so that goes against the earlier signal which the deterministics were showing for the driest conditions to be in the northwest. Certainly if the ensemble data here is correct, that has faded, and now Western Scotland, northwestern England is also seeing a lot of rain, particularly there through days 9 and 10, or at least a good chance of seeing significant amounts of rain. Days 11, 12 and 13, driest conditions in the east, wettest in the west and the northwest especially. So reverting to type as we go through the second week if this is correct. The 10-day GEFS mean surface level pressure plot, so Friday the 3rd of November, has low pressure centred close to the UK, maybe just a little bit further east than on some recent updates, and because of that there is a greater chance of colder air being pulled down from the north, and that's the pattern which the GEFS seems to be quite keen on at the moment, and ECM less so. But the key message here is it's quite an unsettled setup, high pressure sitting too far to the southwest, further showers or longer spells of rain. But if we do start to pull in colder air down across the northern half UK, there would be an increasing chance of sleet or snow over the high ground. As we saw on the GEFS snow row, it was only reaching 3 in Glasgow, but go up over the hills and that chance would substantially increase. The mean surface level pressure plot for York going through the second week. The blues and purples are indicating a lower than average pressure, significantly so. The blues only up to 995 millibars and the average is around 1010 at this time of year. The greens 995 to 1010, so below it as well. But towards the end, there is a sign there perhaps of pressure beginning to increase. It could just be noise in the data, but on the last couple of days, a big increase in the yellow in the columns, 1011 to 1025, and into the early part of November, that would mean that all of those runs are slightly or more than slightly above the long-term norm. So to summarize, there is quite a lot going on there in terms of the details and how things will evolve, but the general pattern for week 1 is for it to remain unsettled with showers or longer periods of rain in all regions. It could also become windy at times, especially through the weekend in the north east and around Scottish coastal counties, maybe also in the southeast. It all depends on how that area of low pressure develops. Temperatures often close to the norm, maybe milder at times in the south and somewhat colder in the north. Week 2, probably staying unsettled with further wet and windy periods. Now, temperatures I've discussed in some detail. The GEFS indicating that it could be turning somewhat colder, the ECM less keen on the idea. Therefore, I'm going to say that temperatures will probably be close to the average in southern and central regions, maybe below it in the north. So, there we have it. I think if I had to use one word to summarise the next 2 weeks, you'll probably not be surprised to learn that it is unsettled. Now, with that said, the details are far more nuanced because there is that chance of colder air beginning to filter down into the north of the UK. Also, uncertainty about the development of the rain distribution through the second week. The ECM ensemble was indicating that the wettest conditions will be reverting to the west and particularly the northwest. GEFS also just had that weak signal at the very end for high pressure to begin building, fewer rain spikes showing up on some of the plots. ECM, as I say, less keen on the idea of it turning colder in the north. So lots to keep an eye on as we head into November. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. As ever, if you did, then please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing to the channel if you've not done so already. And of course, stay up to date with the day-to-day weather details by checking out the TheWeatherOutlook.com website. Thank you very much now. Bye.